So I am going to answer a question this morning when I answer it, and it's about trauma. It's about post-traumatic stress disorder or trauma, and it's not something I know a lot about. So I'm going to tell you straight up, not a subject that is my specialty. When we all study to be psychologists, we start off and we do sort of the first level degree, which is what I've done. And in that first level degree, you get a little bit of everything. And then you have a choice. You can go on and do a master's degree. Hi, Kristen, how are you? You can do a master's degree, and that enables you to specialise. And a lot of the girls that want to become, or guys that want to become clinical psychologists go down that pathway. Hi, I can see you. It's funny, there's a bit of a delay. You come in and I go, hi, and then the comment comes through. So, you know, it's the delight of Facebook that it takes a little bit of time for me to see that you're commenting. So it takes a little bit of time for Facebook to, what am I saying? So people that study to be psychologists, they go and do this master's degree and they get, I'm just commenting, Kristen, that I'm answering a question this morning that isn't part of my specialty. So if you're like me, I decided that, because I decided to become a psychologist later in life, I decided that I didn't want to go down that pathway of doing a master's degree. And the trouble was that they didn't really offer a master's degree to specialise in what I wanted to specialise in, which is couples therapy. So when I was in England, I was studying to be a psychologist, and at the same time I did my, I studied also at the University of East London, so I did studying with two universities at the same time. So I was studying with Monash via distance for my psychology degree, and I studied with the University of East London to get a couple and relationships therapy certificate. And then when I came back to Australia, and I did an internship, and then when I came back to Australia, I did the Relationships Australia internship, and I did their course in couple and relationships therapy, and then I completed my psychology degree. And then I had the option of going on and doing clinical and becoming a clinical psychologist, or I could go on and do my registration via the experiential route, and that meant doing 3,600 hours of supervised practice. And I chose the experiential route mainly because I'd done a lot of study in education previously, and oh God, I was so overstudied, and I wanted the experience. Like, I'd done the degree to do the work. I hadn't done the degree to do more study. So I felt that it would be more valuable to me to get the actual experience. And as it's turned out, it has been, because I feel like I can do what I'm doing now with you, and you can ask me any question and I can answer it with confidence, because I've seen so many people over the 10 years that I've done the work. So the reason I'm telling you all this is because the question today is actually a question about trauma, and I am not a trauma specialist. So I'm kind of saying that up front. Having said that, I have got basic knowledge in trauma, because of course if a client comes to see me and they're in trauma, then I do need to be able to work with them, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. However, if a person is really struggling with their trauma and they need really specific help, that is where I would refer on, and it depends upon the type, you know, the sort of experience that they're having, and I'm qualified to do an assessment, to do an appropriate referral, and that's why we have a network of people around us that we can refer to if we have someone come and see us, because the board encourages us not to practice outside of our expertise. It would be like a therapist who specialises in trauma sitting down and seeing a couple, or even seeing, hi Natalie darling, how are you? Or even seeing a person on their own about their relationship, because they're not trained in that real detail of why people do what they do in relationships and why their interactions may turn out the way they do. They're working more on internal processing and the impact of the trauma perhaps on a person after they have left an abusive relationship or while they're within it. So it's a very, you know, there's subtle differences in the work, and it can be really difficult for you if you formed a bond with someone. I know one particular client, and I won't go into detail, but she had a very unusual phobia. And she wanted me to work with her with this phobia. And I said, look, I know about phobias. Tell me about it. So I got her to tell me about it. I did an assessment. I was able to say, look, this phobia, hi Lisa, how are you? This phobia really isn't something that you've got under control. It's something that's impacting your daily life. And so I'm going to refer you to someone in my network I know that is very, very good at working with trauma. And she was devastated with me. She was really upset with me. And she said, Elizabeth, I want to work with you. And I said, look, for me to give you the quality of work, and I'm charging you to come and see me. For me to do the quality of work with you that you need to get well again, you need to see someone that specializes 100% in that work. So, she took my referral, and I don't know whether she continued to see that person because, of course, it's all confidential and it's a big process. Therapists, even to have permission to speak to one another about you, really should be getting you to sign forms to give permission. So that's another thing to keep in your back pocket too, that, therapists really should be very mindful of confidentiality and let you know what's going on. So I'm going to answer this question today, but please bear in mind, I'm not a trauma specialist. All right, so let's get started because there's 4 of you here now. Facebook's done its magic and you've all found me. All right, so here's the question. It's very short, but I've actually got enough today to work with, believe it or not. How do you cope with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder? My ex is a fireman, and every time I see someone in turnout gear or a CFA shirt, I panic, I have an anxiety moment. Okay, so that tells me straight away that her ex has been abusive or traumatized her in some way for her PTSD to be being impacted by the fact that every time she sees a fireman in, all the gear, that it triggers those moments that she had with her partner. So anxiety or PTSD is actually a disorder of anxiety. Now, we all have anxiety. It's our special response system that's inside us that sets off our awareness to make sure that we know that if something is going wrong, that we need to get out of there or we need to do something about it. The problem with PTSD is, if you think about our knowledge of PTSD, most of us know that men that come back from the war, for example, that have been in, not just men, why am I saying that? That's very gendered. Even women who come back from a war zone and have been subject to some really traumatic experiences can find themselves in a space where they just don't leave the war zone. So every time there's a loud noise, it brings back all of those experiences. So it's like your anxiety goes into overdrive. And we know that people who are in abusive relationships often are left with PTSD symptoms. We know that. So straight away, I know that this person who's written me this question has definitely been in an abusive relationship where there have been experiences that she has struggled to process both in her conscious and unconscious mind, and she's been left with her anxiety on an elevated level. So what happens when you get PTSD? Well, what happens is your anxiety is not switching off. So you're at this high level of anxiety all the time, and the symptoms of PTSD include flashbacks where you think you're there and it's happening all over again. You have really realistic nightmares that are incredibly frightening. And you can have another thing which is called dissociation, where you actually feel yourself lifting up out of your body and you have almost an out-of-body experience as you are watching yourself freaking out with anxiety. So you can imagine that these sorts of symptoms are just so overwhelming and so unpleasant and so hard to deal with that you can find yourself just avoiding everything. And the problem with that, when you avoid everything, is that then often you're at home and you think that you're addressing the issue, but you're actually not. Hi, Pernille, how are you? Lovely to see you. You think that you're addressing the symptoms and you're not, because you're isolating yourself away from them. So you feel like you're giving yourself relief, but then of course, as life inevitably presents you with challenges, as it does, you're still in this highly anxious space. So of course, you still have a firing off of the anxiety. And so what can happen is not only are your symptoms worse because you've had sort of a breakaway and then a sudden exposure, but because you're isolating yourself away, and often people with PTSD have, hi Magic, how are you? Have a co-existing illness of depression, it'll make your depression even worse because you're isolating yourself away to avoid these symptoms. So it's really important that you are really aware of the fact that isolating yourself away is not going to be the answer for you. So what is the answer? And again, as I said, I'm not a specialist in trauma, but I do have enough knowledge to give you a really good answer, I think, of some basic strategies you can use to manage your PTSD. So you've got two ways you need to manage it, and that is day-to-day prevention, because we know that PTSD is an illness of anxiety, and anxiety is something that if you have an anxiety disorder, it's there all the time bubbling away inside you in a level that's higher than what it should be, because it's being set off, because your body is not getting the message that it's, particularly if you've been in an abusive relationship and then you've left, you know, your expectation of yourself is you should be getting better, but unfortunately you're unconscious, and even the automatic triggers that happen in your body, it's like they're bruised. It's like they're switched on and they're not switching off. So we know you've got this elevated space of anxiety within you. So you need to be doing day-to-day strategies to manage your anxiety. Now, I'm going to talk to you about some day-to-day strategies. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but what I am going to do is when this one goes up on the blog, and it'll go up on the 12th of April, which is a long way away, I will have written some additional posts to make sure that these all link in, because as you know, my blog's very young and the posts go up once a week. But there'll be some posts that you can click on that will link into and give you more detail. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is in the links, particularly for one of the techniques I'm going to talk about, which I think might be very useful for this person if they haven't heard of it before, I'll put some links in the comments so that you can go and click on them and have a look, so that I don't leave you high and dry, because I know 12th of April is an awfully long time to wait into 2017 for your answer. But I can't flood my blog with a whole lot of questions. I just can't. So I'm not quite sure what the answer is at the moment. But that's sort of how we're managing it. So that's what I'll do for you. So you at least have some places you can go and get some immediate answers straight away, as well as having my Facebook Live, which you can go back and watch from the beginning. All right, so as daily practice, so this is like, you know when you're unwell and the doctor says you need to take this tablet every day? Well, ideally, we try and avoid medication. I'm not anti-medication, but I really do feel we need to try everything else before we use medication, and then we use medication at the lowest level and manage it slowly till we get the dosage absolutely correct. And the medication should not be used on its own. You would need to be doing these things along with it. So, daily practice. Isometric muscle relaxation. Now that is, as soon as I tell you what it is, you'll know what it is. So this isometric muscle relaxation you can do lying on the bed before you fall asleep. I wouldn't recommend lying on the bed during the day unless you really want to have a sleep, but you can lie on the floor, or you can sit really square in a chair with your back nice and straight and your shoulders back. And the idea is that you start at your feet and you slowly tension and relax each one of your muscle groups. So that's a really basic one, and you should do it before you do any form of relaxation or meditation. All right? So then you can also do a mindfulness meditation. So you might do, you might take your time eating, you might notice everything that's around you, that sort of thing. So doing a mindfulness meditation is incredibly helpful for you in terms of, and I've got a blog post on that if you want to go and read it, that's coming up in the next couple of weeks on mindfulness meditation that I'll link to in this particular blog post. So Mindfulness meditation, very helpful. The one that you think of straight away with mindfulness meditation is eating, because that's where you've got that lovely 5 senses, smell, touch, taste, where you can slow yourself down and really focus on your food and your eating. And it's a very good thing for you to do in terms of your health. The next thing is 4-7-8 breathing. Now, I can give you a link to this. This is one of the most powerful meditations you will ever do. It was developed by a doctor called Dr. Raymond Well. And Dr. Raymond Well, I think, is fabulous. A lot of people criticize him because he's a very large man with a big beard, and everyone says, well, he's overweight, what would he know? But he actually knows an awful lot. And he has developed this breathing technique. It's a yogic breathing technique called 4-7-8 breathing. So the idea is that you take your breath in for 4, you hold it for 7, and you let it out for 8. And I will put a link in the comments to Dr. Raymond Well actually demonstrating the technique. You do it, when you first start doing it, you're doing 4 times in a row only, and you will just feel so centered when you've finished. It feels absolutely fabulous when you've done it. But you need to be careful that you only start with 4 repetitions, and then you increase to 7 or 9 or even 10 repetitions. And I'll show you how, even when I actually do the demonstration on my blog, how I count, so I don't have to count the number of repetitions, as well as counting 4 counts in, 7 counts to cold, and 8 counts out for the breathing. And the beauty of 4-7-8 breathing that I really like is it's something so easy to do. You can do it every day. You can set an alarm on your mobile phone to remind you to do it. And when we go to talk about the grounding toolkit for if you are triggered, it is a technique you can use there as well. So I like it because even if you don't have PTSD, if you're in a corporate environment, for example, and you're in a really stressful meeting, this is something you can use to bring yourself back into awareness. So 4-7-8 breathing, wonderful. I'll put a link to it in the comments. A counting meditation, I love this. And this was taught to me by a supervisor I had once that specialized in trauma. It was her thing. And she taught me this to do with clients when if I was working with them, using different basic trauma counseling techniques to help them really center themselves before they left the room. And the counting meditation is basically, you start at 28. Now, 28 is a very spiritually significant number. Don't ask me why. I used to know. If any of you know, can you play or can find it on the web, can you let me know? I went looking for it and I couldn't find it. And I had found it previously and went, I must remember that. And of course, stupid me's forgotten it. Anyway, 28 is a highly spiritual number. The idea is you do your isometric muscle relaxation as you normally would before any meditation. And then what you do is you count backwards from 28 in your mind, and every time a thought comes into your head, you start back at 28 again. Now, for people with PTSD, this is incredibly helpful, because the trouble is, if you have someone say to you, go and do a meditation, just empty your mind and just chant, well, that doesn't work. Hi, Jasmine, how are you? How lovely to see you. Jasmine is new to our group, so that's lovely to see you. It's something that's incredibly useful to you because it gives you something to focus on. Not just saying, the Om chant or whatever over and over again, which can start to become very monotonous, and next thing you know, thoughts are coming into your head and you don't really know what to do. With this one, you start off at 28 and you count back slowly. So you might only get to 26 if you're really not feeling good, and you go back to 28 again. And again, if you're out and you've had an episode where you've been triggered, this is another meditation you can easily do before you start driving, just to bring yourself back down into a space. All right? So I'm trying, I love meditations that are really practical, because I have so many clients say to me, I cannot empty my mind. No matter what I do, Elizabeth, I can't empty my mind. And so this was where I came up with these ideas to work with clients. And of course, I do remind you, I'm not a trauma specialist. I've worked with clients who've had their trauma mostly under control. But if they really are really unwell, I always refer on, because it's not my specialty. Okay? The next one, the last one, and this is something that I came across when I was working at RA, meant to do some research on it, didn't, and I'm now thinking that I want to do a course in it as part of I have to do professional development every year, and we've come to the end of the psychological year at the 30th of November, and I am seriously thinking that I want to do a course in it as part of my professional development this year, because I have to do a certain amount. And it's called EFT, or Emotional Freedom Technique. Now, I'm going to do my own blog post with my own thoughts about it on my page. There is so much information on the web, and I have come across one particularly good site with a lady that she's got this really deadpan face, but she does give this very, very good description of EFT. And there is another page called the EFT Recipe, which I really like, that in words actually goes through the entire process and how it works. But essentially, it's tapping. Roma, really love EFT. Yes, and what I like about it, again, is it's a process that you use that's physical and involves quite directive self-talk. So the idea is that you start at the set point here and you tap, and then you counting down and resettling each time a thought comes in. Sounds like it could get frustrating. Jessica, it's one of those things where you have to say to yourself, there is no number or right answer that I need to finish at. So if you're doing the 28 countdown, there's no right number I need to finish at. And some people do keep going until they can do a full countdown all the way to 1. And they do manage to do it, because with practice, it's the practice of actually saying, I am going to empty my mind and I am going to only focus on counting. And if you struggle to go to sleep, it's a wonderful exercise to do for going to sleep. And the feedback I've had from clients has been that they've kind of looked at me and gone, I don't know if I can do this. And we've done it in the room, and they've probably managed to get to about 20 before they've had to start again. But then as they practice it, they can get lower and lower and lower and lower down from 28. So yeah, look, it could be frustrating if you look at it in terms of, I need to get to 0, you know, and if I don't get to 0, I'm not good enough. But if you can say to yourself, this is a process, and what I'm learning to do is actually stop worrying and empty my mind, and if it takes me forever to get down the process, then that's okay, because this is about me, it's not about anyone else. And there's no metric that says, well, you know, it'll take you 2 weeks to get to do this perfectly, and some days you'll do better than others. I see. Thanks for the clarification. Oh, good, Jessica. Good. Okay. So Emotional Freedom Technique, it's a tapping technique, and it's like, here you start, and then you go up onto the top of the head, you tap at the temple, you tap at the top of the cheek, you tap here, I think you tap on your arm. It's something I kind of know. I've not done a lot with it, but I do know that for PTSD it is extremely helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some links, and I'm going to go off and do my EFT training, which I know I'm going to be able to find online very easily, and I'm going to claim it as part of my professional development. And then what I'm going to do is write you a really detailed blog post, which will have my full understanding of what it is, and also my take on it, if that makes sense. But till then, I'll give you some links to it for those of you who've not heard of it, and I think it would be an extremely good. So what we're talking about here is your day-to-day management of your anxiety, which is incredibly important. Now, if we get back to the question says, but what do I do if I'm out and about and I see somebody who reminds me of my partner, particularly if he is dressed as a fireman? And we talked earlier in the call about the fact that with PTSD, you can have a dissociation where you actually almost have an out-of-body experience, watching yourself panic and believing that you're back in the situation. Or you can have what's called a flashback, where you almost lose the sense of where you are and you feel like you're actually there with your partner, and you start reliving some of the things that have happened in the past. So how can you pull yourself out of that? Because that's essentially what you want to try and do. So the first thing you need to do is think about what happens to you when you feel yourself going into an episode. Because what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and intercept it before you actually get into the episode. Because what we want to do is get your mind into the headspace that it's had a trigger. And of course your anxiety is highly elevated, so you've had a trigger. But what we're doing is we're grounding you so that you don't, so that your unconscious and your anxiety processes can say to themselves, oh no, it's okay, I am safe, it's not him. Or it's okay, I don't need to take you back to where the incident happened to reprocess it, because maybe there's something about it you're still processing. I don't need to take you back there because it's not happening. I don't need to be triggered by this because I really am not unsafe. So how can you do that? And the most effective way to do that is to link into your 5 senses. So what you're trying to do is, first of all, think about sound. So all of us connect with the world in different ways. So what's important for you to think about when you're listening to this is how do you connect with the world? So I'm a very doing person. So I need things that that are very action orientated for me to absorb and really interact with the world in an effective way. Some people are visual, some people are auditory. You know, it just depends. So I'm going to give you a whole series of things. You might decide you're going to do every single one of them because your PTSD is that severe when you have a trigger that you really need to be thinking about how you're going to do every single one of them. So the first one's sound. So you need to have some really grounding music. So it could be rock music, it could be an orchestra, it could be your favorite pop music that you sing along to. Whatever it is, you need to be able to put those headphones into your ears, your earphones in, switch it on your mobile phone, have it on your desktop, and get that music going straight away. Because straight away, that's going to distract your mind out of it. And you want something that certainly doesn't take you back to anything that you did with your partner, of course. It needs to be something that's new and different that you listen to since you've been away from him, so that it brings you back into reality. You are not with him anymore. You are safe. The next one is touch. So I want you to reach out and try and touch something in your environment. So the more reactive, the better. So if you can touch the bark of a tree, if you can reach down and touch cold grass, if you can touch a hot car, or you can hold a cold ice block, anything you can touch that then ignites your sense of touch back into what's happening around you right now. The next one is taste. So if you can possibly bite into a lemon. Now, of course, I'm thinking of you, out and about. You're walking through the city in the mall. It's Christmas shopping, and there is a fire truck doing a demonstration for all the children. You're hardly going to have a lemon or something like that with you, are you? You might choose to carry a lemon with you in your handbag in a plastic container to have there to bite on. I mean, if you think that would really work for you, then it could be worth getting a little Tupperware container and having your little piece of lemon there with you. However, chewing gum, again, that's action. You got the taste of the peppermint and you're actively chewing. That will help you to just ground yourself and bring yourself back into reality. Smell. So having maybe some rescue remedy with you, or even a little vial of peppermint can really give you a zing, or some of those anti-headache. There's some really great anti-headache things you can smell. Or I know years ago, now I can't remember the name of the company, but it was a company that we don't have here anymore. And they made this like a headache balm, and you could put it, at the back of your neck, on your forehead, on your temples, and the smell of it was just so strong, it would... it'd knock you over. So something like that, and even the action of having to do that, I think would really help to ground you. So sight, take an inventory of everything around you. All right, and this is very helpful. If you come out of a meeting in corporate that's particularly stressful, or you're even in the meeting. You can do this and people don't even see you doing it. So taking an inventory of what's around you, or even counting the first 7 things you see. So if I did it here, we've got greenhouse, tree, veranda post, glasses, hair, necklace, and dress. Yeah? So something as simple as that. You can look for all the things around you that are blue, all the things around you that are green. You can do an inventory of just what you can see around you. Can be very helpful to really bring you back down into that reality. So that's sight. So then, once you've brought yourself back into reality, if you still feel traumatized, you can sit in the mall, provided it's not too busy because it's Christmas shopping and you can't find a seat, but you can find a spot to sit and you can do a 4-7-8 breathing exercise if you have to. You can shut your eyes, make sure you keep your handbag nice and close to you. You can shut your eyes and you can do your 28 meditation and just count yourself back from 28. There's lots of things you can do, and these meditations that I teach are very portable. So you can take them with you, to help bring yourself back down into the fact that you are not what your senses are telling you. And if you remember what I've told you when I've talked about relationships, that our unconscious seeks to understand what's happened to us. That's part of PTSD. We replay it in our head, not just because we're in an elevated state where these grounding techniques will be really good to carry around. Thank you, Elizabeth, for talking about this, and the Inquirer for bringing this topic up. Oh, good. I'm pleased you're finding it useful. So, remembering what I've taught you about your unconscious wanting to resolve, and that in relationships we'll choose someone that helps us to recreate the emotional landscape that we had with our partner. See, I'm going into my space of confidence. Just the same. If you've had a traumatic event, it ignites your anxiety to a higher level. And if you think about it in that way, that your anxiety ignites because you're kind of left with a shock, and your unconscious is going, what the hell was that? And not only is it saying what the hell was that once, but if you're in an abusive relationship, it says what the hell was that once, twice, 3 times, hundreds of times if you've been with someone for a really long time. And so you're processing a whole lot. So if a trigger comes, your unconscious straight away is going to say, because it's in this elevated state, what's going on? And it'll immediately snap you straight back into those memories. And I did do some understanding of PTSD, but of course it's 10 years ago now, about how it's actually a loop that happens through your brain. And that's why you get so easily triggered. So it's about calming that down on a day-to-day basis, and it's about then, if you have that trigger, being able to self-soothe yourself in nice ways, but bringing yourself back down into reality and using these particular ideas I've had to connect with your 5 senses. And for each one of you, there will be a different way that works for you. So for some people that are really auditory, the music straight away will be a really helpful thing. For some people who are, really tactile, it might be that chewing some gum, having that gum, not chewing it all the time, but doing it when you feel something happening, or having a peppermint lifesaver, or carrying that piece of lemon in your handbag. I mean, it's an easy enough thing to do, to carry a little slice of lemon and having that with you. And, because it's the bitterness that just gives you that shock. Or having your headache stuff that you put on you when you feel it, because the smell really helps you. There'll be something that helps you, that helps you really process coming back down into reality. Okay, so the most important thing you need to remember is people who have been in abusive relationships that are left with this PTSD, they're often left with a lot of guilt. Because when you have a traumatic experience, your body goes into automatic pilot, and we are kind of pre-programmed to go into fight, flight, or freeze. That's what happens. And so you might respond in a way that later, when you look back in, you think, what the hell did I do? Why did I freeze? Why did I run away? Or why did I retaliate? What was I thinking? And it's all very well looking back with the luxury of hindsight. And often, as we educate ourselves, we can be very harshly critical, and we can look back on ourselves and say, gosh, what did I do that for? And there can be the most tremendous guilt. And you really do need to remember, and this is part of your recovery, that you did what you thought was right at the time, and you certainly did what you thought was right to keep yourself safe, right down to whether that was staying with your partner or choosing to leave your partner. You did what you thought was right at the time, and it is so important to have that self-compassion with yourself, because we can look at everybody else and be critical, and we can certainly look back on our own lives through our own lens, mind you, which is often very critical, and be highly critical of ourselves. So in this group, we teach self-compassion. That is incredibly important, because we all have challenges in our lives and we all make mistakes. So in having said all of that, these are strategies I've given you to help you manage. The most important thing you need to do is recognize you need help. That's so important. And you need to reach out to someone who's able to help you. That's really important as well. So there's a couple of techniques that I'm not going to talk about today because I'm not a specialist in these, but they are CBT, which I really don't like using. It's not my bag, baby, as Austin Powers would say. So there's that technique, and you can go to specialists who will help you use CBT. One of the hallmarks of CBT, and one of the things I haven't mentioned in my list, is journal writing. And CBT has quite structured journal writing, but even unstructured journal writing can be very helpful to help you process if you have PTSD. And the other thing that they will use is exposure therapy. And you really need to make sure that if you are going to go down the pathway of exposure therapy, and of course that's exactly what it sounds like, that is where you deliberately expose yourself to the trigger that causes your PTSD traumatic trigger in order to try and desensitize yourself. You must make sure you go to someone that's not just trained but experienced as well. Incredibly important, because PTSD is just so debilitating, and if somebody doesn't know what they're doing, they can actually make you worse. So just as you would come to me if you're going to work on your relationship, if you're going to work really seriously on your PTSD because you feel it's out of control and it's interfering with your life and making it unable to live your life effectively, then you need to go to someone that specializes in that. All right. I have come to the end. I'm so pleased. I've had that little bit of feedback that today has been useful for you. I'm so pleased. So that is my answer, my long-winded answer to how can I manage my PTSD. So, the main thing you need to remember is ongoing self-care, and don't forget all those other things that I talk about for self-care, along with all the meditations that I talked about, and then having your special grounding toolkit with the things in it that really help you connect with your 5